to another episode of the Bites and Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Demoranville, and today I have a really special treat for you. Joining me are two incredible cybersecurity experts, and yes, they are both named Andrew Rose. Thankfully, their accents will make it easy to tell them apart. I will let them tell you about their backgrounds, but let's just say both Andrews are well known in their respective cybersecurity domains. I am honored to have them both on the show. We had a fascinating discussion about cybersecurity and agro-food and had a lot of laughs. This will be a longer than normal episode. Trust me, this conversation is well worth your time. So grab your favorite snack or beverage, enjoy your workout, commute, project, housework, or simply drive safely. Let's get started. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. I have the privilege of speaking to two, you heard that correctly, two Andrew Roses. I'm honored to have them both here. They both have a wealth of experience. So I'm going to quickly jump into our favorite moment of the podcast, favorite food and favorite food memory. Andrew UK, as I'm going to call you, you can start.
Hi there. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Lovely to be here. Favorite food is probably lasagna. I do love a good lasagna. Oh my gosh. And I'm not sure if this is weird or not, but I do love it with fries.
Like lasagna. In lasagna or on the side?
No, on the side.
Okay. I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Not lasagna.
So you like dip it in the marinara kind of thing?
Yeah, a little bit of that, definitely. It's really good, but I do love, lasagna is my favorite thing.
Really shocking that someone from the UK likes chips on the side of the lasagna. I'm just going to put that out there, because every time I ask for a side at dinner at my house, it's always chips. The answer is chips.
It really is. Well, coming from the UK, absolutely it is. So that's my favorite food. I think my favorite food memory actually relates to what used to be my favorite food, which was pizza. I spent many years as a complete pizza nerd because we used to live in New York. And whilst we lived there, we went on a pizza tour. And this pizza tour still happens. So I recommend it to anybody who goes to New York. Scott's Pizza Tour. I am not sponsored by Scott, but he did do the tour on it. And it's incredible. He takes you around all of the old pizzerias in New York. And he explains the history behind New York pizza and the science behind it. How about the pH of the water, how that affects the pizza, and all sorts of stuff. And it's thrilling and amazing. And he takes you around and talks about all the different types of ovens, and you try a slice in all these different pizzerias so you can compare and contrast. It's an amazing experience. I absolutely loved it. My wife did say that she'd never actually seen me have such an immediate bromance as I did with Scott when I first met him, because I was just like on his shoulder all the time learning about pizza and hanging out with him. But it was really good. So anyone goes to New York, I'd definitely recommend that. That's my probably favorite food memory.
I'll try to find it for the listeners and put it in the show notes. I've never heard of a pizza tour before. Like that is interesting. And if I could go into the science of it, that's incredible.
It's amazing.
Wow. I mean, I think we could probably geek out on pizza then, because that's great. Like, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And other Andrew.
Thank you for having me here. This is a huge honor. I can't believe that I was mistaken for someone else, but it certainly has aided me here at this point in my life. And then for the two of you, one of the best pizza joints I've ever eaten at is in Vegas. And it's called Secret Pizza. And there are no signs. You have to be able to find this place.
I've been there. Yes. I heard about it. It is weird. It's down this little corridor.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been there.
And you only go there after 12 o'clock, like 2 a.m. there's a line out the door, but it's an amazing place. Anyway, my favorite food and the favorite food memory are both linked together. And my favorite food is lobster. I've often thought if I had done something really, really bad and I was locked in a cell and had one last meal to eat on this planet, it would be a lobster. And not just a lobster, it'd be boiled in the seawater from Bar Harbor, Maine. When I was a kid, I spent several weeks on a sailboat off the coast of Maine, and we pulled into Bar Harbor, and you get a $5 lobster and you boil it in the water of the bay there with some clams and other things, a little bit of seaweed. And it's that right there is a memory in itself.
I was born in Maine, so like you just touched my heart. Like that is it. And actually the episode before that I just recorded, it's probably been released now. We were talking about lobster rolls. So like this is great. Like I love that people are into lobster. I'm like, yes. And of course, I'm kind of like growing out of it now because I've had it so much. But I completely, that nostalgic moment you just described is how childhood was.
And we've reached that point in our lives where they will crack the shell for us and take the meat out. So we don't have to do all that work, the way it was very manual back in the day when I was a kid.
Yeah. Actually, the trick with that is, since, I also live close to Maryland, so blue crabs are very popular here. I don't crack shellfish. I think I got attacked by the antenna too many times when I was a kid, and I just kind of am over it. It's just gross. It's a giant bug. If you sit next to people and you ask them what their favorite part of the lobster or the crab is, they will literally crack it for you and hand it to you. So you don't have to do anything. You just walk around the table and be like, tell me your favorite part. And then they'll give it to you. I've tried this multiple times. It works. So I don't have to touch anything.
This sounds really weird.
It is weird, but it's delicious. It really is. And you have to have a lot of butter for the lobster.
Drawn butter with lemon. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you have to definitely do that. And it's amazing. I actually love fried steamer clams with shoestring onion rings or fried scallops and little really crispy fries. Those are I crave those daily almost. Can't get them unless you're on the beach, because you gotta have a little bit of grit of sand in it, because that's just the way it should be eaten, a little gritty sand in it.
Amazing.
It's like childhood all over again thinking about it. Oh my goodness.
Well, I do have a bonus answer to that one too, because I was on the fence. The other thing is I love scones. 2 years ago, I spent 6 months working from the road just to see if I could pull it off, working in little tertiary towns. And when I go into one of these small towns across the US, the first thing I try to do is find a coffee shop, a local coffee shop, and get a cup of coffee. And if they have a scone, I buy a scone. And then I listen like a thief to the conversations around me to get a sense of the vibe of the town. I check the cork board out to see what kind of things are being advertised and up there. And after 6 months of eating scones, I got back and said, boy, there's a few of those I miss. I don't even know how to make a scone. And so I went on YouTube and started teaching myself how to make scones. And for the last about 18 months, I've been baking scones, and people love them. People more than my friends and family love them. So I don't take that sort of feedback with any weight or measurement of how good they are. But it appears that my scones are a hit. So I'm becoming known for my scones as well.
So are you doing the triangle scones, or are you doing the circle scones?
Well, those are fairly pedestrian shapes. I also like to go to antique malls, and I look for the cookie cutters that are deep enough. So I've got any shape you can imagine. I like the hearts a lot, because I figure if you make a heart-shaped scone, if someone has a broken heart, you give that to them, and they always feel better about themselves. But I've got cats and cows and flowers and stars, like any shape you can imagine. So no, not those mundane pedestrian scones you might find in the stores.
That's great. And the biggest question, though, and I know and Andrew will agree with from the UK side, is it cream before jam, or is it jam before cream? Because this could be a make or break conversation right here.
Good.
Well, you know how our friends are over the ocean there. They have words for things that are inappropriate. So what they might call a scone, we might call a biscuit, and one might have an egg in it. The other one might not have an egg in it. And I'm not that pure. I just want to go what tastes best. This is my palate I'm concerned with. So I'm not gonna touch that one.
Well, there's a definite answer to that, frankly. From an English perspective, it's obviously cream first, jam second. And what we'll steer clear of is the tea situation, whether you actually put the milk in first or the milk in later, because that's equally contentious, but also has a very clear answer from my perspective.
It's first.
No, Kristin, no. Oh, good grief.
Yeah, point of here. Being of you were obviously raised in the southern part of the United States, where sweet tea is the beverage of choice. And there it's
for a while. I couldn't get behind it. It was too sweet.
Well, the thing there is, do you put the sugar in when the water's hot or cold?
I don't know. I never made it. So I have no idea.
Put it in when it's hot. Otherwise, it gets cloudy.
Okay. That's good to know if I ever make it. No, I actually just like iced tea black. I don't really put anything in it. So, and most of the time it's herbal tea here, except for when the in-laws come over. They usually bring a huge bag of tea over from the UK, even though we could buy it here, but it's cheaper. So that's where we get it. Of course, a cup of tea is a very complicated conversation anyways, because everybody has their tea a certain way. And if you say, I'll take a cup of tea, well, to me, what kind of tea do you want? Because I have 16 varieties at least, and it's just a normal cup of tea. Well, what does that mean? So it's always just black tea, whenever Tetley's or whatever I've got kicking around the house. Just makes me laugh, because it's always this part of a weird conversation, always with tea.
if you're asking a British person about tea and they just say a cup of tea, they mean English breakfast tea.
Yeah.
You know, which is the same sort of standard hot black tea, which is Tetleys and PG Tips and things like that. If they're going off piste and going for something a bit more sophisticated like an Earl Grey, they will specify. So yeah, just English breakfast, just default to that and you'll be fine.
Okay, I will try to do that. Usually I just throw it in, but my partner likes it very weak and I just leave tea bags in because I don't care. It's strong and it's fine. But he's like literally like 2 seconds in dip and it's like, you want a whisper of tea. That's what you should say, a whisper of tea.
Oh, Lordy, Lord.
Yeah, there's a lot of oddness. I still am learning terms, I'll be honest. I don't say like kitchen roll or kitchen paper. I was so confused about that for a long time. It's paper towels. Like I didn't understand. I kept being like, what do you want? We don't have any paper in the kitchen. What are you talking about? I'm getting better because now I translate for all my US friends. I feel like that is now my service to the community as I translate British to American quite often, or vice versa, because sometimes we say weird things that you guys don't get either, which is fine, which is probably most of the time.
You just make a whole language up. It's a bit sad, really, what you've done to it, frankly, but hey.
Well, the nice thing is that you can literally insult somebody and they won't even know it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very British thing.
Like
we can
skill.
Yeah, we can write emails like you wouldn't believe. You'll just get to the end of it and go, was that nice or was that really mean? I can't tell. I don't know what they were trying to say. Yeah.
Because it was written in a British accent. So it's just like, oh, it's okay. It's fine. But I love the scone making for you. Like, I think that's great. And the one question I have about that, though, the big one is, what is your favorite type, like kind, like flavor wise that you like?
That is a good question. And I love them all. They're sweet scones and they're savory scones. My personal favorite is a candied ginger butterscotch scone with a light cream sugar glaze on top. That is my favorite sweet. But for savory, I go way off the charts. I like an anchovy, sun-dried tomato caper with a pickle cream on top. So you get that sort of punch, that tart bite, and it moves into more of a salty, umami flavor, but you get a full rich flavor. And I might throw some smoked horseradish cheddar cheese in there too, just to give it an extra oomph. But it's certainly a confusion in the palate, but all of a sudden the flavors dance together and then you're left with this wonderful taste there. But it's, I'm kind of a backyard chef, so it's an acquired taste at times.
No, I think that's great. I mean, nobody can see our faces, but both of us were like, what? You're doing too much was what I was thinking. You're doing too much. But it sounds like it would be good ultimately at the end of it. So I was hoping you'd say something simple like cinnamon chip, but no, you just launched into this.
No, way beyond that. You take it to a whole new artistry level. It's incredible. Yeah.
So last night I baked mangoed candied ginger caramel scones with a simple sugar glaze, and then tart dark cherries dried and really dark chocolate with a sugar glaze as well, heart-shaped, for an event tomorrow.
Wow. That sounds amazing. Yeah. And I have to report back if people liked it. Wow.
Andrew, I will hold you a plate, and then Kristin, I'll find a way to get you some.
Well, we don't live that far away from each other, so I'm sure we can figure it out. We could have a meeting just to exchange scones. I will not be baking them. I'm not about that measurement life, so I don't bake at all. I would rather just throw the ingredients in a pan and make it magical for dinner rather than measure. It's time for measurements.
I'm going to push back. You're a problem solver. I bet if you put your mind to it, you'd be the best scone baker we've seen.
I have to rival my mother. That's a hard one because she's an amazing baker too. So and my little sister who makes like macaroons and all these other crazy cakes. And I don't know, maybe I just don't want to compete with my female relatives on that front either, to get into a bit of therapy there. So now that we've talked for quite a bit, which is awesome, let's do some quick introductions. Andrew, in the UK, I will have you start.
Okay, so I'm currently the Chief Security Officer at SoSafe, which is a German company which is involved in human risk management. So we talk about changing the behavior and the culture in an organization to really sort of minimize the human attack surface. But I've actually been employed in many organizations before this. So I was the CISO of 2 very large global law firms. I was the CISO of UK Air Traffic Control, CISO of Mastercard in the UK, and also was a Forrester analyst for about 5 years in the middle. Quite an extensive experience of security in large enterprises and critical national infrastructure, which is what sort of brought me to this topic that we're going to talk about today, really, because I think this topic area is very underserved and under-talked about, which is great that we're talking about it today.
Agreed. Thank you. And I love that you've done the airports and the air traffic control situation. Not many people can say that. So I love that you have a uniqueness in your own niche, whereas Andrew and I also have that uniqueness with the food. Andrew, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. I am the other Andrew Rose, the U.S. version of Andrew Rose. And fun fact, there is another Andrew Rose who does cyber, but we'll eventually get him into one of these podcasts. So I am an accidental cybersecurity advisor, expert, what have you. I was working for a large bank that does agricultural financing and had just come off of helping stand up the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland as a favor to a friend of mine. It's not that I have any coding or cyber background, is I know how to start nonprofits and write bylaws and put fiduciary responsibilities and governance in there and bring in sponsors. And we hired an executive director, got an office location, got programming up and running. And about that time, I went over to the bank and I inherited a large team that was geographically dispersed. And I figured a great way to do a team building exercise was do a tabletop exercise. And since I'd just come off cybersecurity, I figured, well, let's just do a nuclear internal disgruntled tech employee that bricks our machines, exfiltrates data, the whole 9 yards. And we ran through that exercise, and I won't really go into what our findings were, but it gave us 18 months of work to patch over a few holes that were uncovered. The kind of one of the issues going into this, and for anyone out there listening, is we had assumed we had a playbook. We had assumed that whatever the crisis was, there was protocols and procedures in place to follow through that. And that was the pushback I got when I was pulling everyone together. And I said, well, we'll do this for muscle memory then. We'll run through it just to understand what this looks like. And then we obviously identified some gaps and blind spots. That gave me a lot of pause. And I reached out to a friend of mine who was very high up in the U.S. Cybersecurity Command and said, hey, I'm in agriculture now, and I just found something. I'm a little concerned. Would you look around and just let me know what you see? And he got back to me about a month later with an OSSHIT type of email saying, hey, this is not good. And I'm just doing this as a volunteer. I'm a regular guy, but I know a lot of people. And at the same time, and I can share this publicly because there is a YouTube video, one of our clients is a very large poultry integrator on the Eastern Shore, and their contract growers were getting hit by a variety of business email compromises and rerouting transaction numbers. And it was in the tens of millions of dollars were the hits. And no one knew what was going on. No one knew what to do. And I thought I'd be a superhero, and I called the FBI, and then they would do a YouTube video, a case counterpoint. Here's what you do if this happens. And that was my first experience with dealing with the public-facing information from the FBI. There is a process and procedure. It's very difficult. It's like threading a needle to get them to say anything in public, but there is a way to do that. I put on a series of national seminars to bring awareness to the ag community that, hey, you are a target. This is a threat. We need to be aware. And I did those, this was starting in 2016, 2017. And then probably by 2019, we've done several very large conferences, and the time demands for me as a volunteer were so great that I needed to focus on what I was best at. So I migrated from being everything to everybody to focusing on the emerging threats. And now, and I do want to give a shout out to the FBI. They've been supporting me the entire time. Whenever I need something, it's there. Whenever information needs to be shared with an audience, a speaker, what have you, they've stood up. And to their credit, they always apologize afterwards, saying we could have done more, and I'm always like, well, at least you're there for me. I do appreciate that. But one of their concerns is when they're called is after the incident's occurred. So the right of boom, and the lack of preparation by many companies to what that looks like. Not only are you dealing with the emotion of it, why was I attacked? Why was it me? Why was I singled out? Now you got to make payroll with no records. Now you got to send invoices out with no records. Now you got to receive invoices with no access to your financial systems. So I've been working on small, private focused meetings with groups in the agricultural industry about, okay, it's not if and when, it's when and again. So let's just start planning for these things and getting ahead of these attacks. And that's my cybersecurity contribution. What I also do, though, to keep my lights on, I work on projects that benefit our species 3 generations from now, primarily in agriculture production. And a lot of that's technology transfer from other countries that will then benefit soft landing. It'll benefit the U.S., but it'll also benefit them. And then I also work as a fractional chief of staff for a variety of different companies across different categories, mostly in the agriculture sector, some in the IT sector. So that's a long-winded way of of saying, I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. So if anyone's out here in the area, I'd love to treat you to a crab cake and a cup of coffee.
And you're also harvesting or cultivating your own mealworms right now. Did you tell me that?
Yeah, well, to get really hyper-focused, in the agriculture production side, I specialize in novel plants and proteins. And that's going to be a micro or macroalgae, a seaweed or a microalgae. It's going to be duckweed. It's going to be insects, space agriculture, recirculating aquaculture systems. And I do have an affinity for insects in particular. And of those, I have a real affinity for mealworms. I love the protein emulsification. They're cold-blooded, like the 5 to 9 harvest a year, and they're fun. They're two-dimensional. They don't hop. They don't fly. They don't complain. They don't make noises. They just eat their carrots and apples and whole wheat and just do their mealworm thing.
Live their best mealworm life. That's amazing. Thank you both for your introductions.
Hey everyone, this is Kristin, your host from Bites and Bytes Podcast. It's Pride Month. And at Bites and Bytes Podcast, we celebrate diversity because without diversity, how can we have a secure global food supply chain? I want to give a shout out to my friends over at Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks Podcast, which is hosted by two Georges, George K and George A. Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks is a cybersecurity podcast that tackles the vendor-customer divide with real conversations and practical solutions. Since it's Pride Month, Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks is raising money for LGBTQ+ organizations. This month, the profits from their Pride merch sales will be donated to Out-in-Tech and a scholarship fund for LGBTQ+ cybersecurity students. The Pride Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks logo t-shirt celebrates every color under the rainbow in cybersecurity. And the profits from this shirt go to Out-in-Tech, which is a nonprofit dedicated to uniting the LGBTQ+ tech community by creating opportunities for members to advance their careers, grow their networks, and leverage tech for social change. You can learn more about Out-in-Tech at outintech.com. There is also a special t-shirt that features a message that's handwritten by co-host George K's daughter to support transgendered youth. Proceeds from this shirt will fund a scholarship for LGBTQ+ undergrad and graduate students pursuing cybersecurity education. You can learn more about the scholarship in the show notes. Check out their Pride merch store and get your swag on with one of these shirts at their merch website, bkbtpodcast.shop. I've already ordered mine. Join us and Bare Knuckles and Brass Tacks in supporting Pride this month. All the information and links can be found in the show notes. Thanks for listening and happy Pride.
So let's jump into some questions that I have, because everybody's probably like, well, why did you bring these two Andrews together other than it's fun because their names are the same? There is purpose, actually, because I want to have a conversation more about normal, I say in quotations, practices in cybersecurity, but also let's swing in and how it relates to food, and both of them have industrial background, so it works out just for the audience understanding. Andrew, in the UK side, based on your extensive experience in industrial cybersecurity, aka the airports and beyond, what are the key lessons that the food industry can learn to improve their cybersecurity posture, in your opinion?
Oh, gosh. There's so many lessons. That's the problem. There's, when you look at the control stack that a CISO would look at for an enterprise, there's generally about 130 controls. And however you break it down, it turns out to be about 130 controls, whether it's ISO 27000 standard or the NIST standards. So there's always a lot to think about. But I think, there's lots of aspects to think about. One is the evolution that I think we've seen in the industry moving from IT security, where you're just protecting the box to stop malware getting on it, to information security about, okay, now we've got to protect the value of our information and the integrity of our information. Then moving on to cyber security, where it's actually, okay, well, this is going to affect our service, and our service is going to be down, so we won't be able to deliver our value proposition. Where organizations are moving now is into cyber resilience, where actually, if they have a cyber breach, it doesn't disrupt what they do. And there's certain aspects. There's a chicken sort of growing company that I've been working with as well a little while ago, and they were talking very much about how the need for resilience is paramount to them. They need to keep their systems running. They need to keep the whole process running through. Otherwise, things get pretty horrible. You can't back chickens up and keep them in the same pen longer than they need to be. So I think certainly focusing on that resilience journey, which many big enterprises are going through too, is a real big focus that AgroFoods should think about. And I think the poster child for doing this incorrectly is the Colonial Pipeline system. American guys will all know about that one. But they had their billing system get some ransomware on it. And because because the billing system was infected, they shut down their operational capability. And that's entirely the wrong thing to have to do. So I think in AgroFoods, the people there need to realize that the service needs to continue. They need to be able to continue to produce and continue to move the produce around and get it to the right place. So they need to focus very much on resilience rather than recovery. You can't be down for 2 weeks and then recover it and go, well, fine. That's 2 weeks of produce lost. Goodness only knows the impact that could have. How you get around that is, well, I think you just have to look at all the normal controls that people focus on these days. So how am I going to prevent ransomware? How am I going to keep my network segregated and safe from different external threats? And if we do get a breach internally, how can I make sure that other aspects of my network are segregated away from that? And finally, I think probably the key thing to think about is how most of these attacks start, which is very much the sort of space I'm passionate about right now, which is the human side of the risk. It's really interesting to look at enterprises, and what they do is they seem to spend about 90% of their security budget on technology. And yet, when you look at the statistics, about 90% of the threat comes from people who will click on links, who will open attachments, who will do silly things, send information to the wrong place. So actually, there's a real imbalance there. And normal large enterprises are still dealing with that themselves. So I think as the agri-food industry starts to really get in and tackle cybersecurity, they need to think about this education and awareness to change the behavior of the people who are involved in the whole end-to-end process, because that's where many of those vulnerabilities and those issues will begin, but they can be cut off with some good education and training.
Absolutely. And I think this is why cybersecurity has to be included in food safety culture, because the more you tie it to the safety of the food, the more people will care about it and the more they'll be careful, I guess is what I'll say.
It's interesting to sort of have the analogy with air traffic, because in air traffic control, I didn't care about confidentiality one jot. And that we all talk about cybersecurity being the triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I didn't care about confidentiality. If we lost our HR database, sure, that was a rough day, but hey, could be so much worse. We had to focus entirely on integrity and availability of data, so the air traffic controllers could do their job, and that dot was on the screen. We knew that was exactly where that dot was, and they'd rather have no dot than an incorrect dot. So integrity was vital and availability was vital, and I think those aspects actually are true within AgroFoods as well. The confidentiality is not that much of a big deal, but the integrity of the data to prove the provenance of the foodstuffs and the availability of their systems to process it and bring it through from farm to fork is really key for them. So that they're not just a normal cybersecurity journey. It's slightly different. It's much more critical national infrastructure thinking. It's much more about safety level thinking.
I'm glad you said that, because that's very true, especially even just in straight up manufacturing. It's availability. That's the king, if you will. That's so important. And I was thinking about, since we were both at RSA recently, I was thinking about the marketing information I saw walking around. I don't know if you happened to notice some of it as well. I'm sure you couldn't not actually, but there was one particular vendor who said something like, we eliminate all operational technology risk. And I was like, so you take the people out? Like, that was my immediate response in my head. And it was funny because I ran into another host of another podcast who interviewed me on the floor, and I said it to him, and he was like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, you got to take people away from it. If you keep people in there, you can't eliminate all risk. There's no way. And you just said that. It's crazy to think that people think that you can do the X, Y, Z, but if you don't train your staff, or if they don't understand why it's important and where they should care, that leads to more problems. And it's so frustrating. Pipeline is a great example, but I was thinking of JBS. That also showed that you have to have important disaster recovery, business continuity planning. You can't retract beef once it's hit the trailer. There's no food or pasture necessarily for them to go back to the farm, and it might have been trucked pretty far depending on where they were coming from. Now you get stressed out meat that's defecating on itself, and there's all these other additional food safety issues that are happening because of it. That was such a devastating situation that has such long-term effects, and God knows the payouts were rough. They were paying so much, not only for the ransom, but the cleanup, if you will. And this is the problem is, it's not going to happen to us, but if it does, we'll be fine. How is that assured? Like, I don't know. That's frustrating.
It is. And I think that chicken company I was talking about, they went through all of their processes, and they worked it out that if they had no computers at all, they could still do it. They went back to the paper process. How would we do this with no technology? How could we know what we were doing? And I think that's a very wise thing to do. We've seen other organizations do that when they had ransomware. There was Norsk Hydro, an aluminum smelting factory. And they again had to go back to manual manual processes because the computer system's wiped out by ransomware. So we do need to think all the way through about how could we keep our services going when everything is gone? And certain industries really need to do that. Now, I think AgroFoods is one of them.
I completely agree. Andrew from the US, do you want to weigh in since you were on the front lines of agro-tech?
Indeed. 2 years ago in Fargo, we ran a tabletop around resiliency in a big part of the agri-supply chain. And to Andrew's point, resiliency, not only in an organization, but in an entire supply chain is the critical piece, because you got competitors that if one goes down, see either wolves on the carcass or everyone bands together and makes sure that our citizens get fed and their livestock gets fed. We ran through the what if the computers go down? What if there is an attack here? And Andrew, to your point, paper was the way that things are going to move around. The issue was there was no more paper because everything been transferred to digital. And the people that knew how to use paper have either all retired or almost are retiring. So there was the human element of how do we move things, as well as the physical, how do we record things as they're moving down the chain here. We are going to meet in Fargo on June 11th. And part of that conversation is 2 years later, where are we? Have things been solved? Is there more communication between competitors? We are bringing in the association heads as well. So it's not just the companies. It's we won't call it oversight, but the group that keeps them together. And I think sometimes it's better to have them say, hey, this entire sector needs to function the way it should. And the other piece, Andrew, I'm going to talk about is the integrity of data. You mentioned that part there too. This is public. Back when COVID hit and we were racing to get vaccines done, there was a cybersecurity incident with the calibration of the thermometers, and much of the vaccine was lost because of that attack. And it was an integrity of data. It's the data readout looked good, but it wasn't. And it was done in such a way, in such a minor way that would have been missed. And that's just another issue that, Andrew, going back to the integrity of data is critical, because otherwise, if you're reading your screen or you're going to print a report, everything looks good and you can't figure out, why things aren't matching up or correlated. And the last piece too, and this is what I'm really excited about, is the social engineering piece of it. Again, we spend so much money on blue team, red team, pen testing and all this stuff, which, you should patch your stuff. Things should be up there. There should be somebody watching over all your credentials, but social engineering, especially AI-enabled social engineering, it's here. I mean, we were warning about it 18 months ago, but now it's here full force and we are not prepared. I mean, the tsunami came in and we were still sitting on the beach with our lawn chairs.
That's a really graphic description. Wow. I think the thing that's really interesting about this is it's such a distinctive difference between the enterprise side and the industrial farm, all the whole bit manufacturing, that people keep trying to twist it to be like enterprise. So when they talk about it in groups, like especially, and I'm sure you've run into this too, where you're trying to explain what you've dealt with in your career and what you've seen on the industrial side to someone who's only been in enterprise, they kind of look at you funny, like, but why would you do it that way? And my response back is, a risk in your environment isn't necessarily a risk in my environment, and vice versa. It's the people that are always going to be the biggest risk, full stop. Whether it's their safety or they're doing something or didn't mean to do something or something happened. Most of the time, it's the people that are causing the problem. I would say probably 98% of the time. Technology just doesn't wake up one day and decide to give itself a virus. You know what I mean? That's not something that it does. If it starts doing that, then we're done.
Yeah,
like,
we got bigger problems.
The days of it's become sentient, it's here. No, not yet. What I think is frustrating from a cybersecurity point of view is I feel like I have to evangelize so much into the cybersecurity world to let them know that this is a problem, that agriculture and the food industry need help. And not because it needs help, but because it's the right thing to do too, because we all eat, we need to care. And the fact that it wasn't added to the 16 critical infrastructures, or 15 at the time, until 2020 completely pisses me off. Like, we've been eating and harvesting and doing this for the dawn of time. And here we are not realizing that we need to care about it, because oil and gas go first. Automotive goes first. Water is not even really a consideration at times. We have to rope that into the food industry because it's so prevalent in not only the production of food, but creating food. And I'm actually at a place where I'm simmeringly angry at all times about it now. We need to do something. Like, we need to keep talking about it. All I do is evangelize. Like, hi, we need to care about cybersecurity and food. Yeah. The food teams get it. The food scientists, the quality people, the protection people, they understand. The defense teams definitely get it, because we can help them fight food fraud and obviously all the drug issues that are happening in the food industry. But it's just like, why aren't cybersecurity people click? Where's the light bulb moment? Why aren't they understanding this? Is it because it's too hard? Because it's too, I don't know, food is a very emotional thing, because we have that connection to it. I just don't understand. That's where I get a little annoyed. And this is just me sharing a general annoyance.
I think on that one, I think a lot of the cybersecurity people out there, most of them are very focused on that CIA triad, and confidentiality is everything. And integrity and availability is probably IT operations problem. So they come at this from the wrong angle straight away. And I also had to retrain people who joined my team to sort of refocus them on the key things. So I think they come at it from the wrong place. And I think there's a perception across society that agriculture is not technology based. It's probably the one thing that's not technical. They see it as, there's loads of wheat in the field. Okay, that's not going to get, malware. It's not going to get ransomware. But actually, it's all the process of the technology that puts the wheat in the field, brings the wheat out of the field and gets it to your store. Absolutely, that's technology based. So I think there's just a perception that this is different, that this isn't at risk from those cybersecurity issues. And with the lack of cybersecurity people focusing on the right aspects of it, I think that puts us into this really poor position, which is, again, why I got involved, because I perceive this is the most critical national infrastructure. And yet it just gets so underserved in terms of commentary and governance and oversight and support generally.
Yeah, I know enough about the UK side in terms of the food industry and the agriculture side to know that it's a very regulation driven. There's almost like a police for everything, which is, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing because it's keeping you honest, right? But to the point where the farming, let's be real, and I think Andrew might be able to weigh in on this too, isn't exactly like a money-making role. You can make some money in it, but you basically break even, or you pray to God you break even by the time the season's over. It's so much stuff that they have to deal with. The weather, which is constantly an issue, obviously. The soil, because it's being destroyed. Bugs, because bugs are a problem. There's and then human factors, people being jerks around the fields, doing other things. And then now people are saying, they get all these subsidiaries and all these things, but that doesn't necessarily help with what they need to deal with on the back end. And farmers are very concerned about their data. They're very concerned about where it's going. As the consumer becomes more educated, they're going to want more and more tracking. Like, what plant did this particular soybean come from? It might come down to that. And that's an incredible amount of pressure that's put onto the farm. That's more stuff that needs to be dealt with. It's actually been stated in multiple reports that the food industry is a low-hanging fruit. The food industry just needs support and help from all of us. That's really what it needs. And I hope that as people are listening to this, they start to ask questions critically, even when you're watching a TV show like Clarkson's Farm, because there's quite a bit of tech on that. He's got a tractor he drives around with a joystick, something like that. Or when you watch like a show about food factories or something like that, do you understand the food safety ramifications of having that crew in there, or what that looks like, or how they produce? Do you have questions about, follow the network cable? I want people to ask those critical questions. And I have that come to me quite often. How do I get involved in food? How do I get involved in operational technology security or ICS? How do I get into these things? Stay curious and ask a ton of questions. Get to know the people who work with it, because it's the people and process at the end of the day, as we've already said, that are going to make or break a situation. So with all of that, Andrew, US side, what are some of the most pressing cybersecurity challenges facing the agriculture and food production sectors today? Because that just flows beautifully into what we were talking about.
Number one, you touched on is awareness. When you look at Maslow's hierarchy, I've been involved in this for 8 years, and I can state with a fact that food, agriculture, and water fight for last place in terms of resources from our government for protection. Yeah. Yet absent water, you live 3 days. Absent food, you live for about 3 weeks. If your internet goes down, life's going to suck. But, we got by in the 80s and it worked out all right for us. You take, and I mentioned this at a high level briefing, if we go 5 days without food, you're going to break a law if your kid's hungry. And 3 weeks without food, that's the end of the government. I know some other people have a slightly shorter timeline than that, but I think I give our government 3 weeks without food before everything falls off. And back to the initial question that you asked, I think the real issue is that we generally as a species take our food for granted, that the availability, at least in the first world, maybe the second world, we just go to the store and get it. There's a complete disconnect of all the different pieces that it takes to get it from the farm to your plate and all the intermediary steps in there. And if you just take that for granted and you remove the foundational piece, there's going to be, we're on demand. There's not like there's a warehouse full of bread that's going to be shipped if you're unable to produce more to go with that. And just from the existential risk, we talked about bugs and other things the one that really took us by surprise was the solar flare, knocking out all the GPS systems and all the John Deere tractors in Canada right before planting. You get a short window for planting, you disrupt that, and all of a sudden you can't, if you lose a crop, you can't plant it tomorrow and hope that it comes back in a day or two. It's like trying to raise a teenager. It's going to take 18 years to get that person to an adulthood.
True.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, will you explain explain why GPS is important to planning and because I think a lot of people are like, oh, who cares if GPS knocked out on trackers? You need to care, by the way. Like
you do. Agronomy is so advanced right now that we are planting seeds at depths within millimeter calibrations, spacings of the same. These plants are engineered to grow at a certain rate. Their leaves will shade out the weeds. Their spacing, everything is down to the nth degree, and that's not even taking into account the soil moisture, any kind of inputs that need to be done like that. But it's incredibly precise. And if you think about all the money being poured into ag technology, it's all about that data. The more granular you can get on that data. You did mention data, and data is a huge concern. Obviously, we're mutual friends with Pablo, and Pablo, I love Pablo's idea of creating an ag data lake that some sort of oversight will administer and can then take parts of that data, share it with somebody, but make sure that the farmer gets some sort of reimbursement for that data, because there's so much that's being put on farmers these days. I mean, forget about environmental regulations. I was at an event recently, a very large event, and someone made the suggestion that we should blame farmers if there's a cybersecurity attack on their farm. And
no,
exactly. And I stood on stage. I said, no, stop. Do not even go down that line of thinking.
Listeners, I hope you're enjoying this insightful conversation with the Andrews. Just a quick reminder, if you love the show, please share it with your friends, family, and coworkers. Also give us a rating on your listening platform. Believe it or not, it really does help promote the show and reach new listeners. Check out the new merch store on the website. There's a variety of items, from aprons to t-shirts to hats, and even some stuffed animal toys. Wow. Lastly, if you have a few minutes to spare, please complete the audience survey on the website. It's a great way to give your feedback about the show. Finally, thank you to all the listeners. The show has just passed 4,000 downloads since we started in October. And we are listened to in 65 countries. It's just amazing. And you're amazing, and your support means the world. Now back to my discussion with the Andrews.
One question I do have for the two of you. So, Kristin, what's the longest you've gone without food for?
Probably close to 48 hours if you were to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew?
Probably about 48 hours too, due to food poisoning. I just couldn't keep anything down. Yeah.
That's awful.
My record was 5 days, and I did it as a dare because a friend of mine told me he did 10, and I thought that I could maybe do 10 too. But I got to 5 days, and it was so painful. I mean, physically painful. It felt like there was somebody inside my stomach with razor blades just slashing at me night and day. You couldn't sleep with that kind of pain. And when you hear this term, the gnawing hunger from Appalachia, that's what it felt like. It felt like something was trying to eat me from the inside out. And if you've got that disconcerting feeling after 4 or 5 days, you're desperate. You're going to do a whole lot of things. So, if anything comes out of this, I do hope the cybersecurity community and the regulatory community understands how important food is to us as a species. And if we're not learning lessons from the war in Ukraine, Russia's going to take out electricity in the winter, so you freeze to death. They're going to take out the food in the summer, so you starve to death. If we're not thinking that we're moving into wartime footing and agriculture is not in the crosshairs, shame on us, because I guarantee our adversaries are well underway to whatever planning there is out there. So hopefully this podcast will put a few red flags on the pole as well.
Well, let's talk about that just a teeny bit. So, and I'm not going to get into the politics, so don't think that that's what this is going to be. We're just talking about the outcomes. The Ukraine is a breadbasket for growing, right? And now that they can't as much as they need to for even supporting their own country, but they also support out to Europe, that's putting pressure onto other areas that are flourishing in agriculture, such as like the Netherlands, for example. So let's talk a little bit about what that's doing to the rest of the growing area of EU. What's that going to do to the US? Because we'll have to export if we choose to do that, and other places in the world, because we've already got food insecurity all over the place anyways, and people who are starving because of various other reasons, global climate change, various other things, other wars. How is this going to affect, in your opinion, the global food economy, if you will?
Well, I've got my opinions. I'll jump in here. So first of all, if we take a look at the entire globe, who produces more than they consume? Which countries are those? And typically you're looking at the US, Australia, and Brazil. And when the world is going into a food insecurity situation, the first thing you're going to do is take care of your own population. I mean, that's just normal. If there is excess, we want to take care of our allies as well. Here in the US, we certainly have a geographic advantage of having moats to our east and west and friendlies north and south. And if you look at where most of our food goes, is keeping the people to our north and south very happy. As food insecurity roils the planet, there are going to be populations that are going to not stay within their borders. And there's going to be governments that will begin to topple. In order for us to keep our friends in different continents happy, if we can export some of that excess produce or excess production to them, that will help placate their populations and provide a soft power diplomacy. I try not to get too political on this one here, but what does it mean? It's going to mean, well, there's 8 billion people on the planet today. Today, there's not enough food to feed all 8 billion people. And that's just a given using traditional, conventional methods of production. If you look at a country like Sri Lanka, they went and politically made a statement that they will no longer have anything other than organic, non-GMO production. And within, it was less than a year, they went from an upper middle class country, by definition, every person in the country was upper middle class, to having the politicians swing from lampposts. Everyone's starved. Now the country's in receivership just because of a political dictate. And then if you look at what Europe is doing with a lot of their standards too, they're removing the ability for them to feed their own populations. They're going to become dependent upon other people for food. And that's, they're putting themselves in a weird position. Mexico's playing that same way. It's more of this dogma, this mythology that genetically engineered food or GMO or anything like that, which are scientifically, we need them. There is no other way to avoid that. But I don't know. It's a conundrum. And again, this is Andrew thinking out here. I think we've kind of reached the bounds of upper ends of intelligence as a species. We're primates, so maybe this is the furthest that we can possibly go. And the next 18 months are going to be terrifying. With the Ukraine situation, they were very fortunate to get a grain corridor put up in the Black Sea. As you can see, they've been spending a lot of time on their aquatic drones and making sure that's secure. So they're able to get grain out more than we thought. The issue was when they were doing it overland through Poland and the rest of Europe, all that glut of grain then drove prices down. So there was some reluctance to accept that grain coming across the borders. We'll see. It's not necessarily the food, it's the inputs, it's the fertilizers. And where are the precursors, those fertilizers coming from? The majority are from Ukraine or Russia or China. So the next 18 months will be a little bit bumpy. I'll leave it at that before I get too dystopian.
No, it's okay. And I think that it's especially important to talk about this in some capacity because we are a global food supply. So I think what happens in one area affects the other, even though, the US is somewhat insulated and we have our own issues. Even the UK to a degree is somewhat insulated, but we still have issues on the borders on the outside that are going to put pressure on our interior farmers. And since we've already got issues with environmental factors that are causing, it's been so hot in the UK the last 2 or 3 years during season that their yields aren't as high. And they're driving costs all over the place, like you just described. So here in the US, we have some of the similar problems. And I don't think people realize how much of a trigger we're on with some of this. Every bite of food that we take is a privilege. I always remind myself of that because I understand what it's like to have that moment where the food is in front of you is all you're going to get. And this is what you have to deal with. And if you cannot waste it, it will go in the refrigerator and be leftovers for some other amazing meal the next day. And I think of that often, especially within the food system that we're working in. And it's scary, but it's not to the point where we can reverse some of this, right? We can still work through this. Like you said, we're primates. We're just trying to figure it out, right? And as someone who studied primates, gorillas specifically, I definitely feel that on a whole other level. The basic needs will be met no matter what happens. Hopefully it's just not in chaos.
One thing I do want to add to that, in terms of the heat and the environment and what's going on, there are some really interesting advances in genetics, both for proteins as well as for plants. And I think it's probably common, we've developed a short-statured corn, which has a thicker stalk, same ear yield, but it resists a lot of those windstorms that come across the Iowa and Illinois and Indiana. And Illinois came out with a strain of corn, I believe it was about 2 years ago, that requires 25% less water because now there's an abundance of carbon dioxide in the air that it can absorb. And it doesn't need all that water, but it hasn't evolved fast enough to reduce its water uptake. So through engineering, we're able to assist it in that function. And I'm sure you've heard about the slick gene that we've got in the beef cows. So now we can have beef cows existing on a planet with an ambient temperature of 120 degrees. And I've heard rumors that dairy is not far behind on that one. So the piece there is making sure that we got soy and other crops that can then feed the livestock that can exist on that planet as well. So again, going back to science, because we're not going to be able to selectively breed ourselves out of the way of climate change. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. We just have to work with it, I guess, is the best way to do it. And adjust to it rather than, oh, it's the end of the world. It's not. We just have to make adjustments that may be a little bit uncomfortable. Swinging it back into cybersecurity. And this is what I love about doing this show is because we kind of expand our knowledge set a lot more when we talk as a cybersecurity expert. And I think both of you will agree. The more you're informed about the things around the systems that you protect and the different type of people you protect, the better you can be at protecting them. Because if you don't have that knowledge, then what are you doing? Andrew, I'm sure when you went and worked with the air traffic control, I mean, at the time, were you an air traffic control specialist or was that something you learned on the job?
I absolutely learned it on the job. So I came from a legal sector, which was entirely different, couldn't be more different. And then I was an analyst for 5 years. So this opportunity just came along. And it's the sort of thing you just can't say no to because it's a security role that means something, and working in the legal sector is fine. You're keeping one very rich company, rich and helping them make a merger and acquisition to make them a little bit richer the next day. And that's fine, but it doesn't really mean anything. But air traffic control and those critical national infrastructure things really does make a difference. You're keeping people safe. It's all about safety. And so for air traffic control, I had to learn that on the job. It was very much about sort of transferring my knowledge into the operational technology environment, creating a culture within those operational technology engineers to make sure that they understood that cybersecurity applied to them in their context, and then started to wrap controls around all of those pieces to make sure that we could be safe. And it's interesting. Andrew talked about sort of anarchy and how long it takes. With air traffic control, we didn't worry about that too much, but certainly when I was at Mastercard, we were doing all these interbank transfers, and we knew that it wouldn't be long if those systems failed. If you couldn't go and buy food for your children, how long would it be before you were smashing down the windows and just taking the food? 48 hours? Something like that. And so we knew that we were running systems which were critical and had a really short time base before we created anarchy on the streets of our society. So it is something that people can build up a knowledge of, certainly, but it's not a natural thing. This OT security piece is still pretty rare. We talked about it at RSA, and there's not that many people around with this disability or this way to think through these situations from that angle.
No, we're definitely a very rare, small, niche breed of people, and we're very proud of it, actually. We get us in a room and we all completely geek out together. We really are a community, which I appreciate, and not just on the US side, it's global. We talk to everybody. We're trying to educate more and more. I mean, I've double niched myself between OT and the food industry. So I'm kind of like a party of one, a lot, which is okay. And you know what? I'm hopeful that people will join the party because we do have a lot of fun over here and for food and ag. As we're wrapping up this conversation, because wow, I feel like I've learned a lot, which I really appreciate greatly. Is there anything that you want to discuss about some of the future trends that are coming up? The things that are we need to keep on our radar, not only as cybersecurity professionals, but any of the food people that are listening and beyond.
All right. Well, that's a bone with a lot of meat on it. So I'm gonna pause here and think. One thing I do want to mention too, for anyone who's listening who is in the agriculture sector, if something happens, please report it. There is an easy website called ic3.gov. You can report anonymously. The government will use that information to both triage and identify trends, and it'll be a multi-agency response. If you file something and it's a low dollar amount, obviously the federal government has budgets. They need to justify the expense of going after something. But if you report it and someone else reports it and a third person reports it, all of a sudden the aggregated amount gets to a level where they can respond. So please report to ic3.gov. Report on behalf of your friends, yourself, anonymously again. The FBI is there to catch criminals. They're not there to victim shame. If you call the FBI in, they're going to get it in and out as quickly as possible with full permission from you to access whatever it is they need. And then they're going to go catch the criminal, but they're not going to fix your systems. So I did talk to a large pork producer who was upset the FBI didn't fix his computers. I said, that's not their job. And I couldn't placate him, but I at least stated that as a whole.
Based on the FBI, right? I've sat in some food defense meetings talking with the FBI, and they always keep saying, get to know your field office.
Make a friend before you need it. Yeah, make a friend before you need a friend. That's usually my first bulleted point. But in the ag community, there is a little bit of trepidation about the FBI. There are certain sympathies for what happened on January 6th. And the FBI will be the first to tell you, everyone in this country has a First Amendment right to wave a flag, to have a bullhorn, to ring a cowbell. But once you take an action, that's when risk and consequence occurs. So sympathies are fine, and they're not there to judge you on anything like that. They're there to catch criminals. That's what they do, and they're really good at it. They have a long memory and they have a long reach to do so. So don't be afraid to report if something happens.
So in terms of future threats, from my perspective, I think there's a couple, and we've touched on some already, actually. I think the global threats, the nation state threats against critical national infrastructure are escalating. Mm-hmm. We're seeing, nation states looking to impact the economies of the competitors and the enemies, as it were. And this is being done in a multifaceted way, whether it's political intervention with using disinformation, whether it's attacks on systems and capabilities just to undermine the trust in that society and create division. But I think, as Andrew mentioned, the food agriculture environment is vulnerable to this and could be such a force multiplier. So we can expect really competent cyber attackers to start looking at this space. And that worries me, because obviously the new technologies are coming out right now. And we've all talked about AI and all those sort of things in every other conversation we ever have. But those things are going to enable the attackers to amplify their capabilities. And we'll start to see hyper-personalized attacks coming in. So to date, that's always been talked about spear phishing. Figures out that Kristin likes skiing, and so we're going to invite her to the local skiing club, or whatever it is. But that takes time for an attacker to do. So it's relatively rare. But actually with AI, hyper-personalization delivered in grammatical perfection, with a really compelling lore and a compelling push linking back to news stories that you're interested in because they know what news stories you follow. That's on the verge of coming out. And then that could be supported by a deep fake video, which is your partner or your boss or someone like saying, you must do this, you must click on this link. So we're going to see all those new technologies being utilized in the next wave or two of cyber attacks, being utilized by these very competent nation states to disrupt our societies. And again, agriculture is right in the middle of this. So I'm worried about where that goes. And I think the thing we need to do is we need to start raising awareness of the capabilities first, because if people understand what a deep fake is, they understand what AI can do, then they're much better protected about it. They're more inoculated to the possibility, because they go, oh, I've heard about this. This could be really weird, couldn't it? It doesn't look quite right. So we need to educate, definitely, but we also need to start building those controls in, because Andrew and I have done a podcast together before, or a webinar, I think it was, and there was lots of discussion about all of the innovation that's going on in the agri-foods environment, all of these startups coming with brilliant ideas for improving our capabilities. And that's awesome. Love it. But I'm really concerned that those guys are doing this with not enough of a focus on cybersecurity. Very early on in sort of the physical security phase, when suddenly everyone realized that you could actually connect your iPhone to your front door, and you could actually open your front door with an iPhone, and you could sort of have a doorbell that pushes that. All those products, the first wave of those products came out with no security embedded, because it just wasn't seen. They just wanted to create functionality. That was key. First to market with functionality, all they wanted. And I'm concerned that perhaps that happens again in this industry. And that would be a devastating mistake, because if those are adopted and put into systems, put into processes where we know critical national infrastructure has a problem with legacy tech, you buy it once and you keep it for 20, 30 years and you don't change it. If they're going to embrace these new technologies and put it on their farms, it's going to be there for a while. And if that's not capable of being secured properly, then we're building huge problems for a long period of time here. So there's a lot that concerns me, which is why I think it's great that we have this podcast and other conversations to try and raise awareness, so those startup companies can perhaps think twice when they're creating this great new function and think, well, perhaps I should build security, and perhaps that will enable us to be better in the future. Absolutely it will.
I think also having agro-tech in general be built with security in mind as well is really super important. So any product security people that are on here, hello, can you do that for us? That'd be great, because it would just get that little bit more of of okay, we're somewhat protected, but now we just have to do everything else around it. That would be a lot more assuring, I'm sure, to a farmer than just going down to like the local farm store and buying, a drone that doesn't necessarily, connects into everything. It could cause a problem or something like that is a bad example. But I really think that we need to have better product security inside of the farm tech.
We absolutely do. And there's one sort of incentive to this, because there was a product that was released into aviation, and aviation is very picky about products. But this was released into aviation and it was put into pretty much every, jet and every airliner. But it wasn't really built with security in mind. And so it can do its little function, its little dumb function. And that's all it does. The problem is if they built security into that from the off, then that would have had so much more potential for growth. They could have got that little system to grow and do more functions and bring more functionality and more operation capability to the cockpit. If only they built security in from day one, but they never did. And so now it's hamstrung entirely to only do its little dumb job. So think, if you're a product developer and you're in this space, think very much about, if I want to create the length of delivery, to create a value chain that can get longer and longer with my product, then I need this to be secure. It needs to talk in a secure way. It needs to authenticate correctly using zero trust principles. It needs to be able to be scalable. It needs to, all of these other security things need to be built in. And if you do that, then you'll have a product which you can maintain and build upon for years. And that's where your company will grow.
That's great advice too. As we're wrapping up for a final here, any last words before we go to the listeners?
I do want to give an amen to that. I've been preaching the secure by design principles to robotics and ag tech companies, and it's not a resistance. It's didn't think about that. So it's not a...
It's worse.
Well... They're concerned with interoperability, exchange of information, flow of data. So security is obviously an afterthought, if it's thought at all. But by putting that in the top 5 on their list, now it's there. I'm also coming from the investor standpoint. So an investor's not going to want to put money into a company that's going to have a lifetime of patches and upgrades required because they weren't thinking about security on the front end. That's just going to degrade their investment dollars too. So there is no pushback from that. It's just a lack of awareness, which is the first step in anything. Another piece that I mean, this is more of a global piece, but as a species, we rarely will fix something until it's been broken. So we didn't even understand how significant this was until the JBS attack. So Andrew, I'm just hoping that somebody someday will come back to this podcast and say, all those things Andrew said, yeah, we're going to implement them now that something has occurred, rather than getting ahead of the attack. So I don't want to be overly cynical, but it appears that's typically the way that we operate. Thing that we haven't talked about here, and Chris, maybe you'll cover this in another podcast, was the Microsoft hack of all the executives. And there's a lot of speculation that the source code is gone and that the Russians now know every zero-day vulnerability before Microsoft does. And I don't know if you've been watching your Microsoft updates lately, but every day now there's another patch coming in. And again, Microsoft, I'm just speculating. No one's admitted anything yet, but I have a high suspicion that some of that could have been compromised. And then going back to the secure by design is the liability piece. Let's say that there is that one little thing that everyone's using that isn't secured. What happens if that's a conduit from attacks? Then who is going to hold the liability? Is it the end user? Is it the farmer or the agribusiness? Is it the manufacturer? Who knows? Are they still in business? There's a lot more questions there than there are answers. And as I mentioned before, we need to understand we're in pre-war footing here. Our enemies are already pre-positioned into our critical infrastructure. If we're not aware of that, if we're not mitigating and responding to that, shame on us. And again, this is Andrew just speculating out there, with the number of onslaught of attacks and the increasing velocity of these attacks, we still are playing the nice guy. We're still putting the fires out, fixing things, and whatever offense we're taking is shrouded and opaque. For certain reasons, yeah, but we're going to reach a day when this crescendo is so great that we're just going to take the gloves off and start hitting back. And, I'm kind of looking forward to that. I mean, just they said that a cyber attack could constitute an act of war. And I know that's been said, but I haven't seen it acted on yet. But it breaks my heart because for every ag hack that you see, there's probably another 90 that I hear about that aren't seen. And it breaks my heart what's going on right now. And I really would love to punch back a little bit.
I really wish that people would share, more. And this is why I always say that cybersecurity in a lot of ways is about mitigating shame. It's not just about risk, it's shame, because people feel a sense of shame when they get hacked. They feel a sense of shame when they haven't done enough, or they have to report it. They have to, suck in that, I did something wrong. I don't think people realize how much we don't look at it like that. We're like, okay, what happened? All facts. Okay, good. Now let's deal with it. Or this is the things we could do to prevent that feeling in the first place. And I really wish that people would deal with the shame up front and know that they just have to deal with everything that's going on to avoid the icky, oh God, we might have killed somebody because we poisoned our food or something else really bad happened or people just died.
Or Kristin, I mean, the easy answer there, at least the normal reaction is let's just fire the CISO, you know?
Yeah, we need to stop that too, because that's, scapegoating isn't going to help in the long run. Just makes your company look like a bunch of jerks. That's frustrating. And then here we go back to the simple aspects of farming. Again, they now have to worry about cybersecurity. It's kind of a bunch of crap, right? Because this is frustrating. They just want to grow plants. Like this is what their family's been doing forever or whatever they've chosen the career to do it. And now here we are overloading them. So the idea is to make it easier for them instead of fighting with it. Yes, you have to report when things happen. Yes, you need to reach out to your peers. Yes, you need to talk to people. You all talk to each other anyways. Keep talking to each other. We need to know what's going on. And we really have to stop this silo thing that we have in cybersecurity and beyond of we don't talk to each other. I hate that. This is what makes us insecure. We have to communicate things that are going on and not because, a shame, legal, I can't talk about it. Bleh. You could talk about it and just not talk about it. You know what I mean? There's a way we're all really good at it. We're all really good about not talking about companies, but yes, something happened. And we need to share the steps that were taken instead of the after effect of crisis teams and all of a sudden recovery. And we're going to be resilient through this. If some kind of major incident happened at a small farming company or a mid-sized farm company, it would take them out financially because nobody has 10 million in the bank necessarily, right?
So Kristin, are you setting up the next podcast? Because we ran a field exercise recently in Pennsylvania that is pretty much word for word what you described. There were two identical companies, agribusinesses. They both got hit almost on the same day, the same ransomware, same actors. One paid ransom, one didn't. And we were able to do 18 months later postmortem on what that was. And it is amazing. We haven't released a white paper yet, but that was part of the volunteer work I do for the BIO-ISAC. But
when that white paper releases, will you please let us know? Because I know I would definitely like to read it. I'm sure Andrew would read it as well.
Well, it echoes what you said. The CEO, they didn't even think that this was anything other than why us. It was emotional. It was tears. It was employee tears. So they felt personally attacked. They didn't even think about law enforcement or anything. They just wanted to get everything cleaned up and get their systems online. It was a significant financial hit, a significant time hit, and they are a major player in the country for the sector they serve, as was their competitor. So affirmation to what you just said.
Wow. Yeah. So good. I'm excited for that white paper and I'm terribly sorry that happened to them because we do feel that like we don't want this to happen to people. Some people think that we're ambulance chasers. We're not. And everything that's happening is happening because we've all said it over the last couple decades. We needed to prepare for this. We haven't. So these are the consequences. And I want to just make sure that we have safe food for everybody in the supply chain. Thank you both for being here. This has been a great conversation. I have adored it. I will have all the ways to contact both Andrews in the show notes. Probably some of the other fun things like Secret Pizza and Scott's Pizza Tour will probably be in there as well because we're all ultimately foodies at the end of the day. And I will make sure I put some of the reporting things that Andrew had mentioned, such as IC3 and things like that. So thank you both for being here. Really definitely appreciate it. We're going to have to do this again, obviously, because clearly we ran out of time.
You have to find the other Andrew Rose.
Yes.
I know where he is. It's just a matter of getting him on here. He's defense, so he's often kind of reticent about talking in public.
We'll have to wait till he gets declassified or something, and then we can have him on.
Pretty much.
Anyways, thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
It's been wonderful. Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you so much.
That brings us to the end of this Bites and Bytes podcast episode. It was a long one, but you made it through, and hopefully you gained some new knowledge about AgroFoods and cybersecurity. A huge thank you to my guests, Andrew and Andrew, for sharing their experience, wisdom, and most importantly, their time. All the information discussed during the show will be in the show notes and on the website. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic day or evening wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.